Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Network Hour podcast. I am your career coach, professional development coach, and networking guru, Molly Crease, and I am so excited to have with me today Adriana Crawford. How are you doing, Adriana?
Hi, Molly. I am wonderful today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
You are so welcome. I am so happy to have you here. And today, our topic is going to be we're going to be talking about career pivots. A very interesting topic. We're going to get into a lot of stuff. So, we are just
Yes.
excited to be here for this conversation. Just a little introduction about Adriana. She is a life strategist, an image consultant, and a career coach with a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She enjoys public speaking and working with millennial Black women who want to elevate their lives. That is so very awesome, and we are going to get into that momentarily.
Yes.
But before we dive into the deep stuff, I just want to break the ice with some fun questions. These might
Sure.
seem weird, but I want you to just answer as I ask them. So, question number one, meal prep or takeout?
Both, but more often meal prep.
Okay. Two, soda or salsa?
Seltzer.
I love salsa as well. I
Yes.
do. Are you a morning or a night person?
Morning.
Morning. Oh,
Yes.
okay. Um, the last one is what's the worst professional advice you've ever gotten?
Oh my gosh. Your boss is always right. Do whatever they tell you to do, and you'll succeed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of out there, but that's fine. Okay, so let's get into you, Adriana. Tell us more about you. Who is Adriana Crawford?
Yes, I love that question. So I, as a person, I am someone who is a first generation American. My family is Jamaican, born and raised in New York City, but in a distinctly Jamaican household. And so with that, I was born into a dual identity. So I'm very Jamaican and I'm also very American and very much a New York City girl. And I've taken that perspective with me in my travels across the world. I've always had an interest in world travel, in different languages, and that's impacted the career paths that I've chosen. My parents, my family have come from humble beginnings, and I was always intimately aware that not everyone has an equal opportunity. And so sometimes it's just a matter of connecting the person with the opportunity and they'll succeed. And so that informed the choices that I made in my career, from nonprofit to government to corporate sector, different roles, different avenues, but always through that lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, making places more inclusive, making the world and my community more inclusive. And that impacts who I am as a person. The work that I do with women, the volunteer activities that I participate in, my love for animals. I have a dog that I rescued from a shelter, and just the things that I enjoy doing. I have an artistic side. I've danced for a very long time. I still play and write music from time to time, and I also have that more right brain strategic part of me as well. So all of that means that at this point that I'm fully in who I am, and I'm unapologetic about who I am, and I bring that with me into my coaching, into my work, and into everything that I do amongst family, friends, and associates.
That is awesome. Can you go a little bit deeper on your experience and your journey to get to where you are today? You can share as much as you want to share, as little as you want to share.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So I would say that for the majority of my young life, I knew that I was going to be a lawyer. I had all that. I never wanted to be anything else. I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. And so even in college, that's what I studied. I studied, I double majored in communication and political science. I focused on law and process and policy and government. And I still am deeply fascinated with it. And I've worked in government and I've worked in policy, but I wanted to be a lawyer for for reasons that weren't really big enough or deep enough. And ultimately, it's why I pivoted in my plan, and I made that adjustment kind of last minute because I went through college. I took the LSAT not once but twice, um, and as a matter of fact, I knew that I was going to take some time. But Toni Morrison, who is now passed on, spoke at my college's my university's commencement, and in the 15 minutes or 20 minutes that she spoke, the entire message was, you have these fancy degrees and you're going to go out into this world. But if your only purpose is to look good but not do good, then that's not a life full of meaningfulness or fulfillment. And I felt as if she was speaking to me in that moment because I wanted to be a lawyer in that time because I thought that that was, for one, very much part of my family's plan. In Caribbean culture, the joke is you have three choices: doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's
Yes,
it.
yes.
So it was very much like, okay, I wanted to do it because I felt that that was what I was supposed to do. And that was the way for me to make a lot of money. The passion wasn't necessarily there. And I didn't consider that there may be other opportunities to be successful, to be financially secure, but not necessarily in that avenue. And so I took that year between uh, college and what I thought was going to be law school, interning at several law firms, doing all the things that I was supposed to do. And it really wasn't until a few months into that when I realized, working in law firms, doing the work, that I really didn't like it. I didn't care for it. So I pivoted, and I started working for a nonprofit organization as an academic tutor in New York City public schools, in a dual language or a second language class. And I enjoyed that beyond anything. And then I started working for myself. I built my own small tutoring company. So I was tutoring children, adults, and everything in between, from English as a second language to elementary and high school math. And I realized I had this I knew I always had this entrepreneurial spirit, that I could advocate for myself, and that I loved the policy and the work. And talking to my sister, who at the time was getting her PhD, she said, would you consider getting a master's of public administration? And I didn't really know anything about it. But when I told her the things that I was passionate and interested in, I looked into it and I realized this is the avenue that I think I want to go down. I want to work, not necessarily or specifically in the nonprofit and public sector, but I'm really interested in how administrative practices, ethics, performance, diversity, equity, and inclusion could be applied in across different sectors. And the way that I describe an MPA is, it's like an MBA, except it doesn't apply strictly to corporations or to for-profit corporations, but the same rules apply. We still learn statistics and math and all of those different facets. And so I had 1 month to study for my GRE. Otherwise, I would have had to wait a whole other year, to get all my applications in. And I took that month. Um, I had an hour. I had a 2-hour commute from my house to the job that I was working at, and I would take those 2-hour commute every single day. You live in New York. You're from New York, so I would go from Queens all the way to Sunset Park, Brooklyn. So that ride on the D train was almost an hour, and I would take that time and study for the GRE. And I did it in a month, and I took the GRE, and I did a whole lot better than I did comparatively on the LSAT, and I could basically get into any program I wanted. And so that was the fast track that led me into moving into nonprofit work, into working for local government, and then deciding, because went to grad school in New Jersey, I knew didn't want to stay there, and I wanted to move to Washington D.C., which I did after several years, and that led me to working in a wide array of different paths, and I tried my hand in different things or different areas, but always through that workforce development, human resources. I took a bit of a break and I worked in project management and in IT because I just wanted to do something different, but it still called on my project management skills, my strategic skills. And ultimately, Through that, I maintained consulting. I continued to consult on the side, and it grew, and that consulting piece grew bigger and bigger. And I worked for myself, I worked for other consultancies, and it moved me into a space where even more recently, I knew I wanted to work in diversity, equity, and inclusion full time, fully dedicate my work to that as far as a 9 to 5 outside of my business. And that's what I'm doing. So it was definitely, and that's why I love talking about career pivoting, because it wasn't a straight line. I didn't always know what I wanted to do specifically, but I knew how I wanted to be fulfilled. And so I just continued to follow that path, even though my job title might be different, the industry might be different, but I followed that path, and it led me to where I am now.
Great. That that is awesome. So let's talk about the diversity and inclusion aspect of what
Yeah.
you do. Why did you select that? Was it by chance, or were you really passionate, found out that you were passionate about that? And talk about your work within that capacity, within that area.
Yeah, I was doing this work before I knew that it was actually this work, or like an industry in and of itself. From the very, even in college, from the very beginning, working in advocacy type of work, always advocating and being mindful of different populations, different communities, and how they interact with the world in a different way. Myself, just based on my upbringing, recognizing even my parents having to adjust, or feel like, or be feeling like they have to assimilate in order to be successful within the corporate structure in order to get ahead, and recognizing, and even myself going to predominantly white schools and being directly faced with microaggressions, discrimination, and recognizing I didn't want anyone to have to experience that if I could help it. And so, in all of the work that I did, even though I didn't have the title before I knew that I could have a title strictly for that work, I always adopted it as pet projects, additional projects, added on and took on more work within different roles, specifically because I wanted people to have positive experiences within the workplace, so that they felt valued, that they had that sense of belonging. And ultimately it helped me because I rose to leadership very quickly. So I was managing volunteers and managing staff relatively early in my career. And one of the things that I learned very, very quickly, having been on the receiving end of not so great managers and not so great systems and policies, is that when you have a retention issue, when people leave, when there's challenges, it's expensive. It's an expense of time, and it's definitely an expense of money when you have to continue to look for people to replace because no one wants to stay, or people are disengaged, or they're not doing their best work, they're not as productive. So I knew that if I could be a good manager, if I could use my influence to my higher ups to affect change, to adjust certain policies and procedures, that would be, enough. And in the consulting space, as it became more diverse and DEI became more and more popular, I started to get work in a consulting capacity, to do strategic planning, to do nonprofit board development, to write bylaws, and to write out full plans, diversity plans, and using those years of experience to, do it within former employers, starting a diversity program right from the very beginning. And then from there, moving the trajectory through my career, where I moved into, what I now currently do, is as a consultant in diversity, equity, and inclusion for the federal government. And so I'm soon to be in another role, which I haven't publicly announced yet, but I'll be moving into another role where I won't be in a consulting role, but I'll be part of a company as a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager. So definitely have always had a vested interest in it, because it's who I am, and I have done so much work in that space before I even knew that that's what it was called. I just thought it was just being a good manager, being mindful, being observant, having empathy, having compassion, listening, and quite frankly, wanting things to work well. When you have a problem of inclusion in your job, or a diversity problem in your company, everyone feels it eventually. Maybe not now, but they will later. So for me, it's a definitely a business case. Makes the most sense, and it's the right thing to do.
Why do you think that diversity and inclusion is becoming so popular? Are people waking up, or companies realizing that they should have that as part of their company structure? Why do you think that? Because I know before, earlier up 2004,
Mhm,
2006, even up to 2017, 18,
yeah.
diversity and inclusion
Mhm,
was not something that companies sought after. And I've been seeing it a lot on LinkedIn. I've been hearing it a lot on the
yeah.
news, people getting promoted and getting jobs to
Mhm.
head and to spearhead the diversity and inclusion part of the company. Why do you think that is happening?
So it's a multivariate answer. The first would be that there have been companies who have been making the right moves for a long time. When I think of companies like Starbucks, who they've had some slip ups, but they've always had they made good intentional moves. I think of companies like Target. There are several others that that have been doing the right thing, that have had good leaders who have kind of stepped into the space and always thought through that lens or through that perspective, prior to, of course, last year. And I think uh, what happened is that the diversity, equity, and inclusion boom, which is essentially what it is the product or the outcome of decades and decades of activism that largely went ignored, or largely went uh, overlooked. So companies existed from a space of compliance. So with the EEOC, there are certain compliance. Okay, equal opportunity. You have to, or ADA. Okay, yes, we have to provide reasonable accommodations. No, we can't discriminate against these protected classes. Um, yes, we have to do our annual sexual harassment training. That companies were able to exist and coast on that baseline. Um, just so they can check the box, prevent getting sued, and continue with business as usual. And in many instances, when you have systems, embedded systems within the country, I mean, it's not just the country, this is a global thing, but from the American lens, when you have systems that largely benefit a particular power structure, people, CEOs don't necessarily have the motivation to change if they don't think that it's what's in it for them, if they don't see the bottom line, the financial bottom line. Because the reality is that it requires hard work. It requires unlearning and undoing a lot of things that you thought to be true, of not just about yourself, but about how your industry works, how the world works as a whole. So there's a lot of internal unpacking that has to happen. And then through that, becoming an advocate and using the privilege that is the CEOs may have, the senior executives may have, to then create that access for those that work for you, and work in your company. So you have these decades of this building bubble of those who are advocating for protected classes, for protected groups, calling out microaggressions, calling out blatant discrimination, calling out instances where people clearly have retention issues and the companies are clearly homogenous, but no one felt moved, pressured, motivated to do something really intentional about it. Maybe they threw in a diversity training, once a year. Maybe they did a cultural potluck, during the holiday season. Maybe they threw on pronouns at the end of their names and said, all right, here, we're inclusive. Um, and then last year happened. And we had the time and the space in a pandemic, and we had the space where people had time, and there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of frustration, and people finally said, you know what, enough is enough. And it forced everyone to say, you know what, actually, not only is this the right thing to do, but we demand that everyone start taking real steps and make real real positive changes here, because the people that work for you, that help you meet your bottom line every year, live very real lives. These are people who are Black and brown. These are people who may be part of the LGBTQ plus community. These are people, these are women who have been sexually harassed. The Me Too movement, all, definitely have to mention that as well. So it was a hotbed of all this pressure, the pressure cooker of all of these frustrations that have been happening for decades and decades. George Floyd, pandemic, social media. And you swirl that all around, and it created the boom where now corporations are like, okay, we have to pay attention. And also the research is showing, I mean, nearly everyone cites that kind of the groundbreaking McKinsey report that showed companies that are diverse, companies that are inclusive, make more money. They're more successful. So at this point, it's an investment of time initially, but the payoff makes sense. And now, even more recently, another study came out, showing that people, the American public, like you and me, uh, we want to see diversity. We want to see it on our movie screens. We want to see it in our advertising campaigns. Otherwise, we're less likely to spend money. So again, even if the corporate CEO has no interest or care in the world about diversity and seeing a wide array of different types of people, different types of individuals, or making those accommodations, they care about green, which is the money. So even if they're not motivated by it being the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do as well.
Yeah, and the pandemic has been awful. It has been so, but I always say too, when something awful happens, you always have to look for the silver lining as well
Mhm.
in that. And I think the silver lining is the pandemic really forced people to take a beat, take a step back, and really re-examine some things. And we were forced to really look at some things that we'd never really might have looked at before, or just brushed it
Absolutely.
off. And I think that's what happened with a lot of companies, because a lot of times they would have just had, you go to a company and they just have one Black person in the
Mhm.
entire company. I remember going on interviews as well and being the only Black person being interviewed among
Yeah.
a group of
Yeah.
candidates for a position. And so I think it's good in the sense that now they're paying attention and they're
Mhm.
realizing that diversity is so important, and it's not going to be bad for your company. It's going to help your company.
Absolutely.
I think the entire country, or not even just the United States, but the world is going through some sort of a shift, a
Yes.
kind of a shift that things have to change and get better. So I think that's the step in the
Yeah.
right direction. So, what would you say to people who, business professionals, or students in college getting out of school
Yeah.
and want to get into this space of
Mhm.
of diversity and inclusion? What steps would they have to take? Or if someone is in a career and they feel like it's really tugging on their heartstrings to do
Mhm.
this kind of a work and they want to pivot into that, what
Mhm.
what are some steps that they should take? Because you can't just wake up one day and say, okay,
Yeah.
I want to do diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, so I have I was expecting this kind of question, and not just for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but for any career pivot. And the acronym that I adopted was ACT. So A, which is one, address any self-limiting beliefs and address any barriers that you may have. So, meaning before you even step into the space where you might start the job search or things like that, address whatever self-limiting beliefs you may have about yourself, because you're going to need not just confidence, but you're going to need to step into your full self when you approach this process. DEI work, I'm also a coach, so I'm very used to working in very heart-centered types of spaces where you're by design more personal. than a lot of other careers. And DEI work is similar in that way because you're talking to people and talking about, traditionally taboo things that you're not supposed to talk about, feelings, emotions, challenges, biases, all those kinds of struggles. People trust you with that, and they entrust you to, help address it, through within the lens of like the corporate setting. So it's important to get very honest with yourself about any self-limiting beliefs that you have. Not that you'll get rid of them altogether. All of us sometimes have those, those beliefs, but it's best to address and acknowledge them. Address any barriers that you may have as well. So if you recognize, say for example, to anyone watching this video and they're interested, a college student, someone who's currently in a career, they're watching this video, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what do I need to do? You can go to my LinkedIn, you can go to the LinkedIn of many, many other DEI practitioners and just take a look at the different careers that we're in. And I guarantee you, because I've done this and did this, it's going to be checkered because again, DEI as a distinct role is relatively new. So you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who 20 years ago was the senior VP of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many of us worked in different industries, but we made it our business to be that, to fill that space, or to step in that gap that we recognize. So we were the change makers in our respective organizations, and that's how we gained the experience. And that's what moves me to the next, which is C. So there's A and then C, which is cultivate relationships. Um, I cannot stress enough the importance of building relationships. So if you're interested in moving into this work, and you go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great avenue, and it's a great tool. Especially, I mean, I think, again, I'm in multiple communities by job and profession, but I think that the community for millennial women, for Black women, is so strong on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Cultivate relationships. I have yet to write a quick message to someone on LinkedIn and said, either asked for an informational interview or said, hey, I'm interested in this work. If you have 15 minutes, just to talk about it, that would be, really invaluable. Because the relationships that you cultivate can definitely pay off. Maybe it doesn't result in them offering you a job. It actually, I would say, it rarely results in that. But what you need is information, real
Mm-hmm.
information from an experienced professional, experienced practitioners. I can't stress that enough because it also helps you understand what the work looks like in real
Mm-hmm.
time. You can look at job descriptions until you're blue in the face, but the reality is that in this work, the job description is a job description, and then there's the work itself. And so it's important to be aware of that and to recognize it. Um, and then the next is to think strategy. So you have these relationships, okay, maybe I need a little bit more experience in this area, because experience is really, really important. um, think about how you're going to get that experience in your current job. Are there employee resource groups? Is there a current diversity program? Look at your employee handbook and revisit it. Look at the current statement on the company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do they even have one? Were you part of forming that strategy? If your company has a strategic plan, what's their strategy? What's their 3-5 year strategy on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Some companies say commitment to inclusion or commitment to belonging, something along those lines, or they even put in employee wellness in there. But what does that look like? Does it exist? If it doesn't exist, start having those conversations with your HR rep around how you can potentially volunteer to support in that. Talk to your other colleagues and say, hey, this is something that I've recognized that we could probably do a little bit better in. If you're not part of your employee resource group, join an employee resource group. If there are several that don't necessarily speak to you, start one. If your company has a designated HR person, or if they have a designated diversity manager, that's how you begin those conversations. If you're a college student and you want to get into this type of work or this type of space, I would first of all, number one, any major, like there is not a distinct major that prepares you. Maybe there are some that may help. So it helps to be aware of systems, like to be aware of current systems that have disenfranchised individuals. So you may have a lot of people that may choose to major in sociology or communications or political science, but it is not a requirement. What's required is a commitment to educate yourself thoroughly and from a wide array of resources. If you're coming fresh out, my recommendation would be to look into avenues like, although human resources and DEI aren't really one and the same, um, some companies operate in that way. So you may want to get your start just in HR as a coordinator. If there are junior diversity roles, get your start there. They may ask for you to have skills like coordination, management, operations, even just setting up meetings and taking notes and doing things on maybe the more administrative side. Um, and as you get your experience within human resources, within people management and culture, then you can continue to grow in that space. So there's a number of ways that you can move. But again, because this is a relatively new, the work is not new, but the distinct attention and approach to the work is newer. Um, you're going to find a lot of people who have varied experiences, which is why I think it's so important to cultivate those relationships, have those conversations, so you can talk to someone who's actually in it and has been doing it.
Yeah, those are really great tips. And like you said, it's not new. It's not new work, but for me, I think it's such a big job because
Yeah.
then there are so many different facets, so many things, different things that goes into it.
Yep.
Is it When you think of diversity and inclusion, advertising is part of that, dealing with the employees is part of
Yes.
that, the
Yes.
company message is part of that.
Yep.
And so you have to be able to navigate all of these things. And at the same time, like you mentioned, you have to check your own biases, because sometimes your religion might be not
Yes.
of what they're asking you to do or what you have to talk about, and you have to realize that you have a job to do and certain things you have to put that to the side. And it can definitely be difficult for some people to do these things, especially if these are biases that has already been
Yeah.
so engraved in you and how you were raised and all that stuff. So it's definitely a big job. It's not a job for the weak at all.
No. No. Not at all.
Not at all. So let's talk about the Elan principle, because
Yes.
on your website, and I was reading your intro, and it was so interesting of where you came from.
Yeah.
And I just want you to share about that and tell us more about the Elan principle.
Yes. So, in speaking of this heart centered work, the work that I've done throughout all of these years, the Elan Principle was born from one. I had another. I mean, I still have this company, but I had a consultancy where it was strictly or initially started as strictly B2B. So I was working with businesses, nonprofits in there and helping them craft their strategy, their plans, things like that. And I was in career coaching. I had specifically I was doing lots of resume writing, interview prep, interview coaching. I was strictly in that space, but I always found myself, especially 99% of my clientele, were women, Black women. And I always found myself always moving from career coaching to more like life coaching because, again, lots of that self-limiting belief, other challenges that were creeping in. So it was never just strictly about the resume or just strictly about the job interview they were preparing for or their career navigation. There was always other factors. And I found myself saying, okay, well, there's more here. There's more here that I can offer. So how number one, how do I get the education to apply good and time tested coaching techniques and principles so that I can adequately coach women? And how do I apply that to myself? Because I went through quite a journey where I was dealing with serious mental health challenges that I didn't know that they were mental health challenges. I just thought it was just part of who I was, and it was very easy for me to mask it because as someone with high functioning, mental illness, no one necessarily paid attention. It was like, well, what do you mean? You're successful. You got a
Mhm.
business. You're rising. You're rising through the corporate ladder. Um, but internally I was seriously struggling. My weight had gotten out of control. My mental health was really suffering. I'd had just challenging relationships, not just romantically, but just challenging aspects of relationships. And I knew that I wanted better for myself, but better in a way that really mattered to me. Because again, from the outside looking in, folks would say, oh, okay, well, Adriana is she's doing these things, I'm traveling the world. So I started certain aspects of elevating my experiences in my life with travel and having different perspectives and really being intentional about the experiences that I wanted. But there was really critical areas I've been ignoring. And so, there's this phrase, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's like, something like at first God or the universe throws a pebble and then they throw a brick. And that was kind of what it was. I had kept getting little pebbles thrown at me, warning me that, okay, you have to, something has to give. But I was ignoring it until the brick happened, which, was my proverbial rock bottom. And in that space, I built myself back up, not just by myself, but with the help of a community, which is why it was so important for me when thinking, because the Elan Principle is a rebrand of my previous company, when thinking about what it means to have a community of support, a personal trainer, a therapist, a coach, a spiritual advisor, mentor, people who have your best interest at heart, and being open to the process of learning and relearning and crawling your way back to and beyond who you thought you could be and who you want to be. That's what I want. That's what I wanted the Elan Principle to be for women, and that incorporated the image consulting. I always loved fashion, and I've always loved having a good aesthetic. But for me, image consulting is not just, which is why I'm very clear that I'm not a stylist. Um, Although of course it's a huge part. It's a huge part of it, putting clothes together, but the image consulting for me always starts internally. And I probably will sound like a broken record because I always say it's the internal. The internal has to be aligned. I mean, no one's perfect, no one's a finished product, but you have to get that internal set. And as we work on that, then the external shines through, because the external is simply that representation of how you feel and how you want to present to the world based on who you believe yourself to be internally. So for me, that's why I say it's holistic. So when I meet with someone, and the majority of my clients are Black millennial women, and they say I want to change in my life. I'm not happy with my career. I don't feel like my fashion or the way that I dress is clear. It doesn't really speak to who I am. I set a lot of goals and I never meet them. I don't know what to do. For me, the Elan principle is that stopgap between what they were doing before and what they're going to do next. So I always tell my clients right at the very beginning, this is about you. I don't give you the answers. I'm not dragging you and telling you what to do. I'm unlocking what you always had this whole time, the way that I had to unlock it within myself, the way that other people, coaches, helped unlock it within me. So that's the Elan principle. It is a holistic resource, and it's a space where, and I want it to, and it's going to continue to grow because ultimately I want it to be a community for women who want to live beautiful lives inside and out, in their careers, in their image, and in their lives.
That is so awesome. After, especially after the year we've had, and sometimes, a lot of times in our Black community, we go through stuff and we don't know that
Mhm,
it's mental health issues, and we have to
mhm,
think about our mental health. I remember, even
yeah,
though even me myself, when the pandemic has just started, and and you wasn't going into work anymore, and you're at home, so you're not dressing up, you're not putting
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
anything. And I remember going through that period where I was just rolling out of my bed and being
Mhm.
at home in my pajamas and not feeling happy, not
Yeah.
feeling attractive, not feeling beautiful when you look in the
Mhm.
mirror, because you're not getting up to put on, if you used to put on your
Yeah.
makeup and all that stuff. And I remember going through that period, and
Mhm.
and having those people to talk to and to really having that community is so
Yeah.
important. And I talk about that all the time when I
Absolutely.
talk to people, is that having those mentors and all of those people that can really breathe life back into you is so important. I
Yes.
feel like 2020 also has been the year of the pivot. It's like everyone sat back and
Yeah.
realized that, oh my God, I'm in a job that's not really stable, or I
Yeah.
might be part of a job that I'm realizing that I don't really like it. So,
Mhm.
or what am I going to do? Or maybe I had an idea for a business and I have downtime now to think about it. Should I really start this or
Yeah.
whatever? And so pivoting is so important, but also you can be so stuck with all of the issues you
Yes.
have dealing with on top of that.
Yeah.
So what would you say to people who they want to pivot, they want to do what makes them happy, but
Mhm.
they feel they feel stuck, and it's not only stuck, but it's also self-doubt. And I say
Mhm.
self-doubt hinders purpose. so so
Yes.
so what would you say to those people that are experiencing that?
So that I mean that self-doubt is a make or break. And you're absolutely right. It's something that is pervasive within many people. And I find, I mean, yeah, I work primarily with Black women, but pretty much every single one of my clients, that's one of the first things that we have to start unpacking because it's so prevalent. Um, and so I would say, for one, if the self doubt is so strong that it has hindered you and boxed you in for years, that I would strongly consider getting a coach if you can, or a therapist. I definitely did both, and I still have both, a coach and therapist for myself. I think every coach should, at some point or another, have a coach.
Hmm.
Um, if that's not an option for you, then highly recommend. I have my own training where I address the self-limiting beliefs and doubts. A freebie that I'll throw out is um, it's a 3-step, which is when you have those self-limiting doubts, when it pops up, and it usually sounds like I can't, I shouldn't, I could never, I wouldn't. When that pops up, to pause. So stop for a moment and be like, wait, I just said I can't do that. Why did I say that? I couldn't. One of the examples I give is it could be as simple as walking up to a train station and you see the escalator and you see the stairs, and you think to yourself, I'm not going to take the, I can't take the stairs. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to take the escalator. That's a self limiting belief right there, as small and as tiny as that. So pause and think to yourself, that was a self doubt. That was self doubt. I just boxed myself in. I just told myself I couldn't, shouldn't, or would not do something with no basis because it's not true. Think. Take a moment. I mean, if it's as immediate as an escalator versus stairs or elevator versus stairs, take a moment to think and think to yourself, well, why did I just think that? How many times have I told myself no? And then pivot. So change directions. Literally, if I take that moment to pause, address and call out that self doubt, that self limiting belief that I just had, I think about why I just did that. And I ask myself that question because what that does is it activates the problem solving mechanism in your brain to help solve the problem as to why you thought something that was not true. and then you pivot, you act immediately. Some instances, it's not you're not going to be able to make a decision as quickly in real time. But when it comes to even careers and opportunities, you can apply that same trick, that same tactic in real time. I mean, self-limiting beliefs very often stem from our childhoods, from what people told us. So as we grow into adults, the voices or the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other people, and about the world are not really what we have, but are the thoughts and the beliefs that someone else gave us. So that one time the teacher told you that you could never, that you would never be a writer, or that one time your parents said, you're not very athletic, so you probably, shouldn't try out for the swim team or something like that. It could be something as small as that was said 20, 30, 40 years ago, but you've adopted that as a truth now and you didn't even realize it. So it's really important for me, if whenever I talk to anyone, to identify the root of it and extract it from there. And sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it can be very quick.
That is awesome. We're coming to that time, but I don't even want
Yeah.
this to end because it is so much, so many great nuggets in there that you spoke about. What's your last minute advice or tip
Mhm.
I should probably ask for our topic career pivots?
Yeah.
How would you sum that up?
I would say, so for one, I define a career pivot as an intentional and strategic move in taking charge of your career trajectory. So it is it sometimes you can stumble into a certain career path, but you have to, from my perspective, manage your career like an entrepreneur. So I know we're in the age where everyone is talking about being an entrepreneur, having their own business, and some people are, they're suited for it, and some people maybe not so much. Maybe they prefer having that stable 9 to 5 job. That being said, when you approach your career like an entrepreneur, it means that you are willing to think innovatively, take calculated risks, know your worth, and always look for opportunities. It doesn't mean that you're going to be job hopping from year to year, but it means you can always look for different opportunities to challenge yourself, to stretch yourself, speaking to your supervisor or direct manager for stretch projects. And so I would say that the key to pivoting your career successfully is to adopt an entrepreneurial mindset as you navigate your career. Um, and again, to plug myself, but to plug coaches everywhere like you and other coaches as well. If you can, invest in a coach. Invest in a coach, because the reality is that as good as we may be in navigating the things that we can do ourselves, and some of us are better than others, there is nothing like having a coach who has an objective perspective, who has the experience, and who has your best interest in mind as you move along the journey.
That's some great advice because I have a coach as well. So
Yeah.
you have to have someone that can pour into you and that you can
Mhm.
also bounce those ideas off of. And it's important, definitely important for you to have those people. So I too do have a coach as well. So tell us, do you have any projects coming up or anything you would want our listeners to know about? Also, tell them where they can find you, connect with you to get your services and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So, if you want to get in contact with me for any reason, you can always connect with me. First on LinkedIn, where this conversation will be posted. If you want to engage in my services, again, I offer holistic resources for women. So, all women. So I want to be clear about that. So that this includes femmes, non-binary, trans women as well, and this includes career navigation, career strategies, I call life strategy sessions, which is life coaching and image consulting. And I particularly specialize in curve plus size women as well, because I
Mm-hmm.
find that for many of us, um, uh, there seems to be very few options or things like that. So if you want to engage with me, you liked what I had to say, you want to find out more, go to the elanprinciple.com, which is TheElan Principle, Prins Principle, the elanprinciple.com. And it's the same on Instagram as well. And from there, if you just want to have a conversation and figure out what might be best for you, or we can take 20 minutes to just talk about some of your needs, I have a consultation option for you as well.
Well, Adriana, this was awesome. And I will be posting your information as well in the podcast notes. So our listeners can go to the notes and really just copy your information and really contact you. This podcast is going to be posted on YouTube, Facebook,
Great.
and Instagram, and also LinkedIn as well. So there is a plethora of platforms for people to listen to this and also to get in touch with you. So that's
Great.
awesome. I am so happy that you came by, you stopped by the network hour to talk to me about career pivots. Your journey is so inspiring and so awesome. And I hope when people listen to this podcast that they really get something from it, because it was such great information and such good energy. And I just want to thank you for
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for having me. This is really, really great. It's a good way to kind of to kick the day off since it's still morning heading into the afternoon. So I really love talking about this.
yes. And so, guys, before I leave you, I always leave you with a quote for the weekend so that you can get into it as you listen this podcast, and then afterwards you think about a quote. And so the quote I have today is: "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And when we think about building new and not going back into the past and saying shoulda, coulda, woulda, that's when we're able to move forward, and that's when we're able to progress. So that is the quote I'm leaving with you today. Thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Network Hour podcast. Remember to like, share, download, send it to a friend. And until next time, this has been your professional development career coach and networking guru, Molly Crease, and I will see you next time. Thank you, guys.